Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you so much for joining us today. We know it's a tremendously busy time of the year for everyone, both professionally and personally. So we're all super grateful that you've decided to spend about an hour of your day with us. Today, we're going to be talking about some different ways that you can help position digital marketing efforts as a growth engine, as well as potentially contribute some fuel to that engine. So in terms of an agenda for the next hour, we'll do some quick introductions, provide a bit of perspective on our subject today, and then dive right into our approach. Hopefully we'll have a bit of a lively discussion, walk through some of your questions, and then we will all be an hour closer to the weekend. Before we do that, a few housekeeping items. This session is going to be recorded, which I'm sure that we are already doing. Great. And it's going to be emailed out to you in the next day or so. So please keep an eye out for that and feel free to share that recording with your team. Please say hello to us or each other, I guess, in the chat. However, we are going to be using Zoom's Q&A feature for our question and answer period at the end. So there's a Q&A box down there, I believe, in the middle. So if you have questions, please pop them in there. And then finally, we have a fairly diverse representation in our session today from lots of different types of organizations. So we've tried to include a range of subject matter from quite tactical to quite conceptual. If you do want some advice on specific subjects or issues that you're facing right now, please feel free to raise them during the Q&A. Great, so let's get started. We'll do a brief introduction to our team on the call today. My name is Miles Sellen. I'm the president of Major Tom. My role is fairly diverse, although I spend most of my functional time supporting our business development team and working closely with our clients on their foundational strategies before they get into execution. Chris?
Thanks, Miles. Hey, everybody. I'm Chris Ferris. I'm the Vice President of Digital Strategy at Pure. And I work with our clients to make sure that they're getting the most value out of their digital marketing initiatives. That can include SEO, website development, social media, online advertising. I also teach a digital marketing class at Rice to MBA students.
And I am Shade Vaughn. I do not have a PhD, which makes me feel a little bit insecure next to Chris. But I am the CMO for North America for Capgemini Group, which is a large global professional services firm. We have about 270,000 people around the globe, and we help companies primarily around how to drive transformation through technology. And I am really looking forward to the conversation today.
Thanks, Shade. Just to clarify, I also do not have a PhD, so we're in the majority. Great. So prior to diving into our approach, we wanted to set a little bit of context and provide some perspective for our conversation today. So we asked you in your registration what your biggest challenge was when it comes to full funnel marketing. While some responses were very specific, we did make a visualization of the general sentiment. I can't hear any of you, unfortunately, but I'm sure you're all laughing. We actually took your answers and put them together in a word cloud because it's not really a presentation if there isn't a word cloud. And not surprisingly, the most common theme was around budget, either budget being cut or needing to be justified or defended in a more thorough way. And the reality is that marketing budgets, both digitally and holistically, tend to be the first victim of short and long-term budget cuts, especially in times of adversity. As marketers, we're pretty intimately aware of the impact that removing or drastically reducing one area of our budget can have on overall performance. But the question becomes, how can we advocate for marketing as a growth engine in our business and thus make it much more difficult as a line item to cut in times where sustaining growth is more important than ever? I'm a really big fan of analogies as tools to increase comprehension. And one I think works quite well here is the idea of ingredients and meals. So when we look at a collection of ingredients independently, it can be hard to conceptualize what they might end up as when used together. In this case, maybe a delightful holiday dinner. And so when the person who approves the shopping list, which usually in our case is a CFO or perhaps the C-suite as a whole, sees marketing as a list of ingredients rather than the meal, it becomes fairly easy to start removing ingredients with the expectation that the results don't change. But when that happens, instead of this, we end up getting this. So it's quite easy to cut ingredients, but it's hard to consciously want to ruin a delicious meal, especially when the outcome of that meal is a great experience for our customers. And really, our job as marketers, amongst a lot of other things, is to be advocates for the holistic nature of our discipline. So with that in mind, what are the tools that we can use to not only get the most out of our respective areas of our marketing funnel, but also demonstrate that, inherent interconnectedness? And traditionally, that approach has centered around a top-down marketing funnel. This is not new to anybody. This has been taught in marketing since marketing has been a discipline, basically. And while it certainly has its merits, it does tend to be quite abstract. You see them in different tactics across different stages of this funnel, but it's hard in some ways to demonstrate their interconnectedness. So more and more, we've seen a lot of value in collaborating with our clients to create more dynamic visual representations of marketing funnels, the tactics and the content pieces within them, and how they influence one another. So we've been spending a lot of time, changing the marketing funnels presentation to look a little bit more like this. And while it is certainly more work to map out your marketing funnels in this way, it can become a huge asset in demonstrating how simply removing a section or drastically reducing the budget for a particular tactic can have cascading and compounding effects in other areas and on overall performance. So this is ultimately quite a simple funnel. I mean, I think you can imagine your own marketing initiatives, and once you map out everything, they become incredibly complex. And it can feel a little bit overwhelming at first. So my recommendation is really to start small. Take your evergreen marketing campaigns or your simplest, most straightforward customer journey and try to map out every tactic and touch point. You might even uncover some gaps that will allow you to improve performance right away. So we're now going to spend a little bit of time zooming in on a few specific areas and provide some more information on how you can either get more efficiency out of a specific area or further demonstrate how various tactics work together to provide a great customer experience. And with that, I will hand the mic over to Chris Ferris, PhD.
Thanks, Miles. PhDs are significantly overrated. It was a lot of work, and it doesn't really. I don't get to practice medicine or anything like that. But I appreciate the kind words from you and Shade. So one of the key ways that we work with clients to help grow their businesses is through organic social media. And one of the key parts about organic social media, next slide, please, Miles, thanks. One of the key parts about social media is that you can target your audience. There's an old joke that marketers and advertisers used to say, I know half my advertising budget works, I just don't know which half. And with organic social media, and as well as with paid, which Miles is going to talk about a little bit later, you can really target who you want to see your ads very specifically. So part of that process is identifying who you're trying to reach with your social media. And a lot of times we go to clients and we say, well, who do you want to reach online? And they say, well, we don't know, we want to reach everybody. Well, no, you really don't. And so one of the things that's important to do as a marketer is to make sure that you have a very clear idea of who your audience is online, whether it's a potential customer. Actually, let's go to the next slide. A potential customer, current customers, advocates, whatever. So you need to have a very clear idea of who you're trying to reach. And then once you figure out who you're trying to reach on organic social media, then you pick the platforms. Now, if it's a B2B, if you're a B2B business, you're probably going to want to start with LinkedIn. Not 100% guaranteed, but you should at least consider LinkedIn first. LinkedIn is the most effective way to communicate in a B2B method on social media, again, with potential or future or current clients. Then you should probably consider Facebook. Facebook is the big kahuna in social media. It doesn't always apply to B2B businesses, but plenty of businesses use Facebook to try to communicate their messaging or their branding or their or make sales on Facebook. So that's another option. And then you should also consider as well. There's a case to be made that if you want to communicate to the news media or reporters, Twitter is really the place to be. So again, there's not a one size fits all solution for businesses. And if you want to be successful and be able to prove the results of your efforts, you need to be smart about your audience and figure out how to reach that audience and which social media channel you choose. And then you need to decide, well, what are the goals I'm going to measure, right? A lot of times we talk to clients and I say, well, what's your goal for social media? And they say, well, we just want to be there. And that's not a good enough answer. That's necessary, but not sufficient. So you need to figure out your goals. So your goals could be getting leads to your website for new customers. You could be the people buying something from your website. You talk about your product on social media and they go to your website to buy. It could be customer loyalty. It's surprisingly easy, or it's surprising to me how often people feel very connected to brands via social media. You can also establish trust on social media, right? If you're talking about yourself in a way that's authoritative and important and meaningful, you can establish trust for yourself. And then the last one is you can establish you and your team as thought leaders. This is something that we do at Pierpont a lot of. That's one of the reasons we do webinars like this, is we use social media to establish ourselves as thought leaders in the industry. And that reinforces a lot of the other goals. But again, it's important to figure out what are the goals that you're trying to achieve via social media other than just being there. And then when you talk about yourself on social media, you want to be careful about how you talk about yourself. Now, if you just talk about your business all the time and you say, well, I'm kind of a big deal like Ron Burgundy, that's okay. But how you may be perceived is like this. Like Patrick Bateman from American Psycho, where you just think your customers or your potential customers aren't terribly important to you. So what I mean by this is it's okay to talk about yourself and talk about yourself as if you are a big deal, because if you are a successful company, it's okay to talk about yourself in a flattering fashion. But if that's all you do, you come across as very self-centered and maybe a little psycho or sociopathic. So don't just talk about yourself, add value to your social media. So then as you decide what kind of content to compose that will reach the audiences you want to reach, that will work on the channels that you're deciding to use to reach your potential customers, and then you've got the right voice to talk about yourself in a way that fits what you want to do, then you start composing the content, publishing it, and then you reach your potential clients or current clients or whoever your target audiences are on the different social media channels. And then the last part, and this gets back to what Miles was talking about earlier, is if you've set clear goals, then you can try to establish ROI. You want to make sure that you're able to prove the value of what you're doing. Now, organic social media is tough because you're not spending money, right? You're not buying an ad. You're not buying a Google AdWord or boosting a post on Facebook necessarily. But if you can track back to say, look, we published this many posts, we had this many impressions, this many clicks, it drove this traffic to the website, and that led to this many leads, sales, whatever your goals are, then you can prove ROI. And that's really the hardest part though. But if you can do that, then you can make the case that you are not a cost center, but you are a revenue driver.
Thanks, Chris. I think there's some great insights there, and is going to tie in really well to what I'm going to be talking about in terms of paid social. So to dovetail on that subject of social media, in my experience, when budget cuts do come around, paid social initiatives are often one of the first victims. And I think when you view them in a traditional marketing funnel, it's kind of easy to understand why. Oftentimes paid social initiatives across channels like Facebook or Instagram or even LinkedIn are very focused on prospecting. So they are about getting people into the top of the funnel and creating that brand awareness. As such, they seem like they are providing lower CPA and overall lower ROI than some lower funnel initiatives like Google search. So that's quite typical view of looking at it. And so as marketers, we know that there's a lot of nuance to kind of what those tools do and why they exist where they do in the funnel. But by just placing them just like this and having them exist independently or potentially attributing the same metrics to them, you don't really present a great picture of how useful they are. That being said, when you use something like this and you create a more dynamic, nuanced view of your marketing funnel, it's a lot easier to see how intrinsic they are to the overall consumer journey. Paid search will always be important and is going to be extremely effective at driving immediate conversions. Keeping the top of the funnel full with activities like paid social will ensure that you have a steady flow of warm, engaged consumers to be captured by those bottom funnel tactics. It's kind of counterintuitive. You tend to ease off on top of funnel initiatives when times of adversity or budgets end up being cut, but then you generally don't actually feel the impact of that into several months down the road when the bottom of the funnel starts to empty out. Another way that you can begin to present your metrics in a more balanced, holistic way is start to develop your own attribution model. As I mentioned earlier, I'm an analogy guy, so let's talk briefly about pizza. Everyone loves the person who brings pizza to the office or the party. Let's call that person Mike. So Mike usually gets all of the credit for bringing the pizza. But Mike probably wouldn't have brought pizza if Jan hadn't given him a 50% off coupon that she found. So Jan is great too. But Jan wouldn't have remembered her 50% off coupon unless Maria had suggested that they get pizza from her favorite local spot in the first place. So yay for Maria. But in reality, Maria wouldn't have even thought about pizza unless Jarvis had suggested it when he saw a paid ad for pizza on his Instagram and realized that he was hungry. So when you look at that full picture, both in life and in marketing, the natural tendency is to attribute all of the credit to the last person or the last click. In this case, that's Mike, or oftentimes in digital, it's paid search. But based on your specific customer journey and your understanding of the importance of each stage of the funnel, you can start to create your own attribution model, which more evenly distributes the credit, aka revenue or ROI, across those different tactics. So in that case, it becomes harder to justify cutting specific parts of the funnel out. Now I'm going to pass things over to Shade to talk through how we can provide more value to customers after they buy a pizza. Shade?
Yeah, and I think, as Miles and Chris and I were talking about this, the interesting thing is a lot of the same tools and technology that you use throughout the funnel to push your targets through the funnel are just as important when you think about loyalty and retention and building brand ambassadors that you have. So like most of you, I assume, in response to the pandemic, you made a lot of quick pivots and investments to accelerate your digital transformation. At Capgemini, we made a lot of investments in buyer intent technology that shows us where our targets are, what their online behavior indicates, what type of websites they're going to, what sort of searches that they're doing online, and layered that on top of propensity to buy tools, so we know what technology they're more likely to buy into the future. And that's driven a lot of our campaigns that set up the top of the funnel, as Miles said. But one of the I guess surprises we found in onboarding that technology was how valuable that became in helping ongoing client retention and loyalty. And the reason is because suddenly we have a very clear idea of what our existing clients are doing online. So we know very quickly if suddenly they're going to our competitors' websites, indicating that maybe they're looking elsewhere for a services provider. We know if a different part of the company than the one that we're serving is suddenly doing a big search around a specific initiative that our main stakeholders might not know about, and that puts us in a position to go to that stakeholder and say, so and so over there in your IT department is looking actually for some investment in cloud, which threads together very nicely in the conversations we've been having around this other topic. And so the more intelligence that you have, the more insights that you have. And as I was in a meeting with Gary Vaynerchuk last week, and one of the points he made that made me think about B2B marketing in a different way is he actually feels like the volume of content that we put out actually should be 10 times bigger than it is. And most people think you need to get much smaller and more targeted, which is true, but you also want to be putting it out on many more channels so that you understand what's resonating, what's not, where you see some shifts in trends and so on. And he made the point that B2B marketers have a sense innately that we do need to be mostly on LinkedIn, we do need to mostly be on Facebook. He said, there's no reason that B2B marketers shouldn't also be on TikTok. I mean, everybody that you're marketing to is a person, and it's more about, are you communicating with them with the right messages for that platform? Like, you can't just take a LinkedIn ad and put it on TikTok and suddenly everything's hunky-dory. You've got to have very good marketers or a marketing agency partner that is able to put you on those platforms in a really meaningful way. And so from a loyalty and retention perspective, I guess, Miles, if we'll go to the next slide, I think there's some critical points to understand and keep in mind. We do not define how our clients engage with us. I mean, they're going to decide that. That's been accelerated over the last year, and that is never going to go away. They're going to dictate what they're interested in talking about, when they're interested in having a conversation. So us trying to manipulate that is never going to work. The opportunity for us is to understand when to engage and where to engage and how to engage, but understanding that when we have that conversation, it's got to be about what is the value that we create for our client. And I mean, an example of that in the B2B context is, how do we organize a webinar that's custom built around a specific pain point, bringing in some subject matter experts, and we're offering that to them free of charge. Maybe it's a piece of thought leadership or content that we know that they're interested in. And you can do that in a very subtle way. You can put advertising in front of them, could be on LinkedIn, could be on Facebook or Instagram, showing them a piece of thought leadership that we know that they're interested in, but they haven't asked for. I find it really irritating. I get pitched all the time. People send me emails and say, we noticed that you're doing a lot of searches right now on buyer intent. Would you like to hear more about our platform? No, that is the wrong way to approach somebody about their business. What is interesting though is if I'm clearly interested in buyer intent, and suddenly I'm seeing ads for that speak to exactly what I'm interested in, and I'll click on that ad and learn more. And at that point, maybe it's worth having a conversation. But our job as digital marketers and sellers is about, how do you uncover that knowledge, the insights, and the value that we're creating for our clients, and turn that into mutually beneficial opportunities. I mean, obviously, it can't all be about just investing in the client. It's got to be also, how are we going to get something meaningful out of that? But you will not succeed unless you think about it in a way that's going to provide that value. And then if you go to the last point on this slide, Miles, what you see is that the right kind of engagement is key. And I've kind of talked about this a little bit already, but if you flip to the next slide, Miles, you'll see what I mean is that as marketers, we've got all of these tactics at our disposal, whether it's online ads, it's paid social, it's the customized landing pages that we have, the emails, the client stories that we want to promote in our offers. And clearly, retargeting has opened up a lot of opportunities to get much more targeted and fine-tuned about what content we're putting in front of them. But these things only provide value to the client if they're about the conversation they want to have. So it's not so much that these tactics go away, but it's that we as marketers have to get much, much smarter about understanding what our clients are thinking about, what they're most interested in, and ensure that the content that we're putting in front of them is not just spam that's adding to the noise. It's something that screams value that we can bring to you. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Miles.
There we go. Thanks, Shade. You know, one thing that just kind of occurred to me while you were talking through that, and I think would be an interesting discussion to kind of start us off with the more sort of discussion-oriented aspect of this conversation is, you know, you mentioned kind of uncovering the right kind of engagement, the right kind of value for consumers. Obviously, there's lots of different ways to do that. And, you know, in my experience, a lot of that has been based off what kind of tools and technology do you have at your disposal. And I think, you know, between the three of us, we all work with a lot of different sizes of organizations with different levels of digital sophistication. So I thought maybe we could chime in on kind of how some of our clients are actively doing that and how we're supporting them, to give a bit perspective on like, how do we uncover that right customer engagement? Maybe start with you, Shade, as it was your focus.
Yeah, I mean, I think our clients are all in a similar boat to the ones that we're in. I mean, we're all looking at how can we accelerate our shift toward these digital tactics, and in a lot of cases, there's a dearth of talent in these areas. I mean, a lot of it is still needs to learn and train. It's not like universities, although they're getting better, are developing these skill sets. And so I think everybody's struggling with, you know, where do I find the right talent? What are the best tools? And I think the maturity of the MarTech stack has progressed so much over the last couple of years that we're in a very different world today, and inevitably a year from now we'll be in a very different world. So I think having the right kind of partners that can advise us and advise our clients on what to invest in is really key. I mean, I'm thinking I had a meeting earlier this week with a global financial services provider, and we were having this exact conversation of how do you bring more digital technology to the meetings that you have. Everybody's meeting virtually now. So what are the more creative ways that you can use, like Mural for, during the meeting, you can track workshop whiteboard sessions and things like that. How do you create videos that are more compelling and more interactive during these sessions? I mean, how can you create follow-up sessions? The beauty is that we're in an environment now where you can bring in people from all over the world. It doesn't matter of their time zone or where they're located, and you can bring great thought leadership together and have these meetings on a much more frequent basis and have a more meaningful conversation, because you don't have to fly everybody around the world. So I think that's great. But I think I guess the headline that I would end on is that we're all in this together. I mean, I don't know that anybody has it all figured out, and I don't know of any client that has ever reacted to me and said, yeah, I already understand that. I get that. Because I mean, none of us do. None of us can fully get all aspects of it. It's how do we find the right talent? And from my perspective, I think what I've looked for the most over the last year is we've hired a lot of those that understand marketing technology, and more importantly, how can they help us onboard a massive organization onto these platforms. And how can we create a 3-year strategy and vision for the types of tools we're going to need 2 years from now that we're not mature enough to need right now. I think that's really key, but also just campaigns and I mean, just the stuff that you and Chris just already talked about is to get more focused and targeted around that. You've got to have people that really understand digital and really understand customer experience in order to operate those campaigns.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Chris, maybe for you, obviously, thought leadership is a huge aspect of what you and the team at Pierpont do. And, a certain element of thought leadership is obviously positioning the person providing the thought leadership as a thought leader. But another aspect of it is finding that value for the audience. So how does Pierpont go about kind of assessing what's going to be the most valuable for a consumer?
We talk to our clients a lot. We're very, very client focused at Pierpont. And so we spend a lot of our time having conversations with our clients, not just telling them, here's what you should do, but hearing from them, like, what do you need right now? What are the pain points that you're experiencing? Even if we've been with them for 6 months or 6 years, we constantly are talking to our clients, and we need to hear from them, what are the pain points and what's working and what's not working, so that we can constantly be getting better. And then we push back on them too, right? If they don't have a very clear idea of, again, like we've all been talking about, how do you want to engage your audience? How does your audience benefit, or how do they respond positively to certain kinds of engagement? And it's not just looking at numbers, it's actually looking at the content, right? It's not just a quantitative analysis, it's a qualitative analysis. And so if you can look to see what's resonating online, whether it's paid ads or organic social media or emails or whatever, you need to build in that sort of feedback loop with the client. And some clients resist that because it's a lot of work, to be looking at the numbers and to be looking at the content and the feedback all the time. But the more you can get them into that cadence of really being evaluative about what's working and what's not, ultimately they usually come around. And I like to tell our customers or our clients that there are no failures. There's just learning opportunities. And if we try something in social media and we tried a couple different ways, it doesn't work, then we've hopefully learned something from that. And that's the other thing we try to reinforce with our clients, is that there is, to Shade's point, nobody knows everything. We know a lot, but we don't know everything. And digital changes so rapidly that it's really hard to be 100% certain about everything all the time. So to be a little humble and to view things as learning experiences, I think, is one of the reasons that we at Pierpont are successful.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think across both of your answers and in a lot of the subject matter, with digital, we tend to lean towards technology and it being, kind of impersonal to a certain degree, but it also provides us the opportunity to be tremendously personal. Mm-hmm. And one thing I always find with our clients is there's kind of an aversion to actually just asking your customers. People generally, if you just flat out ask them things, they will tell you, and you can start to create really engaging messaging, really valuable content, because people will tell you what they want as long as you have a good avenue to ask.
Yeah, we start every engagement with our clients, whether it's for public relations or for digital or for marketing, with a discovery session. Like, we don't come in saying, thank God we're here, we've got all the solutions for y'all. We want to hear from them first. And we build that into almost all of our contracts. So we have a discovery session first, so that we're giving them the opportunity to do what you just mentioned, Miles, is to tell us their story and to hear from them. And then that puts us in a much better position. And then they feel like they've invested in the process too, right? It's not just us parachuting in as the savior. It's a partnership. And I think that's super important as well.
Absolutely. So we've got a couple of questions coming through here. So Sarah's asking, what guidance do you have for very small businesses with limited resources, people, and budget? I'll maybe take a first crack at that, and then by all means, guys, jump in. I think, Shade actually mentioned Mural in his past answer. I think tools is a big aspect of it. There are a lot of great inexpensive tools that aren't going to allow you to spend more on paid budgets or anything like that, but can start to make you much more efficient in your work. I think one of the missed opportunities that I see with a lot of marketers is that they assume that they need big budgets to get lots of work done, where in actuality, if you are just more efficient with your time, you can up your production levels. So using things like Canva to start to produce visual assets really quickly that look great is really helpful. I am a huge convert of a software called Loom, which is a asynchronous video communication tool. So you can record videos just from your desktop and send them and track engagement. Marketers tend to get pulled in lots of different meetings. Lots of meetings can be replaced by 4-minute videos that you just send to people and get feedback on. So I would really recommend that, especially in a remote environment. And then I think another aspect is really once you start to get into lots of different tactics, pull yourself back, see which ones are providing the most value and being the most effective, and try to double down on those because it's quite easy to spread yourself thin when you have limited resources.
I would say, I would add to that, Miles, and then I'll hand it back over to you, Shade. It's just fail fast. Don't be afraid to try stuff because most of it is not super expensive, whether it's a social media paid campaign or Google ads or adding a chat bot to your website. There's lots of different things. Most of them don't cost a lot of money. So again, be smart about it and then try what you think will work, measure it. And if it works, great, keep going. If it doesn't, don't beat yourself up. Just say, okay, that didn't work. Let's move on to the next thing. So I like the idea of failing fast.
Yeah, I completely agree with both of those points. I think one cheap, or I should say cost-effective way, one tool that we use is Influ2, which if you're not familiar with it, you can put in specific, you can target specific individuals at, let's say, some companies that you want to work with, whatever your buying center is, and they will start seeing ads that you create and develop. I mean, clearly in B2B world, thought leadership is probably the primary vehicle that we use in order to create advertisements, but it's something like $2 per month per contact. I mean, it's really cost effective for you to be able to get in front of the specific people that you want to be in front of. So that's another tool that I'd recommend. But also just, I mean, like thought leadership and let's say media pitching that you do, I mean, it comes from your experts. So like just mining the thought leadership that you have, you'd be surprised how much is within your own company. I mean, I publish a lot on market related topics, but it's easier than you think to get a byliner placed. I mean, clearly it would help to have a good partner like PurePoint to do it on a consistent basis. But as long as you've got good thought leadership, there's going to be outlets for it, and there's going to be an appetite for it. And so I'd focus on that. But also, just to reinforce, there are a lot of tools that you can use in order for you to generate some pipeline just based on your own content.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. And I think one of the challenges I hear a lot from marketers around thought leadership and content production is, I can't get my CEO or chief product officer to sit down and write content. And I think the reality is you probably won't get them to do that. And there are lots of kind of sneaky ways, even by just providing like very quick questionnaires and sort of extracting some of those, nuggets from them and then passing them off to a copywriter can be a lot more effective than expecting a CEO to write you 1,000-word blog post. So we got another question.
Say, Miles,
by all means.
Small business is if you want to start a paid campaign of any sort, whether it's Google ads or social media ads, start small. Select a very specific geographic area or a particular industry or a limited time frame and start small and see what works. Again, I feel like we're saying the same thing, but it applies to small businesses. Start small, see what works, draw lessons, and then expand. And you're not going to always see a linear relationship. Like if you spend $1,000 last month and you spend $2,000 next month, your leads aren't necessarily going to double. They'll probably increase, but they're not going to double. There's not usually a linear relationship between spending and return. But measure that and see, when does that curve flatten out a little bit, right? So it's the more you spend, it's going to go up, and then it's going to flatten a little bit. And when it plateaus, that's when you want to say, all right, that's the right spending threshold for us. We don't want to keep spending more money because it's not getting us any benefit. So be very deliberate about measuring what's working and what's not.
Yeah. And I think reassess that too, because what might work over a 3-month span may stop to work in the next 3-month span. So it's always something you got to keep your eye on. A couple folks in the chat have mentioned or asked for specific spellings of some of these softwares. So we'll pop them in the chat. I know we just spammed a few of them, but as we're going through these questions, I'll pop some of them in there. Shade, I think, and Flu too, if you could add that in there, would be great. So maybe while we're on the topic of small business, and Pradeep will get to your question in a moment, but Claudette mentioned working for a not-for-profit that is just starting to invest in marketing after 23 years, and that they have a very, very small budget, about $5,000 for 2021. If we were in her shoes, how would you allocate this money? So that's a very, very tight budget to work with annually. My recommendation would probably be to stay away from paid initiatives of any great significance, because you're going to burn through that quite quickly. So if you are in a specifically targeted industry like I believe medical surplus, I would really focus on content creation. What kind of system can you create on organic channels, especially things like LinkedIn? How can you go connect with those relevant people in your industry? And then how can you start publishing content that's really valuable to them? That's going to be the easiest way to get that budget to stretch rather than jumping into something like Google search.
And I want to add something else to that, Miles, which is something that we've all been talking about today, but I think it's a theme worth repeating, which is to ensure that your content adds value. It's one thing to say, Pierpont's great, we do these things awesome, we're terrific, but it's more valuable to people who you're trying to reach if you give them a couple of tools or some information. I don't know if anybody here is familiar with Sprout Social, which is a competitor to Hootsuite, which is what we happen to use at Pierpont. But Sprout Social is really good about creating lots of good content around SEO and mostly around social media and things like that. And it doesn't directly benefit them. Like we subscribe to Hootsuite, but I use the content from Sprout all the time because they're really smart and they churn out a lot of good content. And so make sure that your content is helping people, not just selling yourself.
Anything to add, Shade? How would you spend $5,000?
Honestly, well, I don't think I could offer anything better than you guys have already said. I do think that maybe putting a little bit into the Influ2 advertising just to see if you can get some awareness among some specific people that you want to be in front of. Can't go wrong with some of that, but I do think great content, or maybe an answer out of the field for you is, we talked about how important talent is. Maybe recognize and reward your own team for going above and beyond as a way to recruit and retain your best employees. I think that's got to continue to be a big focus.
The other way to think about the $5,000 is, well, what is a new customer worth? If a new customer is worth $20,000, then maybe you go all in and try to get one new customer, and then you've got more money to use to get more customers. But if a new customer is only worth $6,000, then you've got to be a lot more careful with how you spend the money. So it really depends on what the value of a new customer is, and that will help determine how much you're comfortable spending to try to get that new customer.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and that ties into some of the conversations around marketing funnels and justifying budget as a whole. I think one thing we see a lot with marketers is viewing marketing in a vacuum. So we'll say, oh, we're getting a great return on ad spend. You're like, well, great return on ad spend is highly dependent on what your margins are and what your total cost for acquisition can be. So just because you're getting great return on ad spend, you might still be breaking the business model. So really kind of seeing that whole way through. And I think if you are a marketer, investing some time, take some online courses around financial literacy and like business structure is really, really helpful and can make you a better marketer as a whole. Pradeep, you had mentioned, how do you see the role of conversational AI technologies in your stack of social media tools? Anybody want to jump in on that one immediately?
It can be really valuable. I don't see it on social media as much as on the website itself, where you can set up these little chat bots and they can engage customers in a pretty friendly way. They don't quite pass the Turing test, right? People still know that they're talking to a bot, but you can get enough information out of people to then funnel them to the right person within the organization. So you're not relying on a human to do the sort of the scut work at the front end. When if you can get an AI chat bot to do that for you, that'll save your team time. And I think that's probably how I would recommend leveraging AI for a business. Rice Business School does that right now. They have a little chat. It's called Owl or Owly. I can't remember. The Rice is a mascot is an owl. So they've got a little chat guy and that looks like an owl that pops up on the Rice site that they try to encourage. And they ask the prospective students a couple of key questions, and then they funnel it to the right person within Rice for follow-up.
Makes me nostalgic for the days of the Microsoft Word paperclip. Right. I think the other aspect of conversational AI, obviously it works great at scale. So, if you're in a high volume customer service industry, then there can be value there. That being said, it's getting better all the time, but it's still not to the point where in a lot of industries and situations, it can provide the same level of customer service that your customers would maybe be used to. So I think it depends a lot on the context of your business. If it is something where your brand is really positioned as a customer-centric organization, then you've got to make sure that that conversational AI is doing a great job. So you've got to be a bit more stringent in figuring it out, I suppose.
I would just to add to that, we definitely do recommend to all of our clients, especially retail, but to your point, Miles, high volume, high focus on customer experience to adopt it. We don't as much from a B2B perspective. I think it's worth having on your website, but it's not something we focus on as much because we typically want to drive that in-person engagement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that, Shade. We've talked about having a chat bot on the Pierpont site, and we've elected not to. We just think, to your point, it's better to have in our case, because we're not a high volume business, we want to have that personal connection with people all the time. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've actually seen some really interesting studies on specifically in the financial services industry of, chatbots there have varying degrees of usefulness because once you start getting into, sensitive data, it can be a little challenging. But the amalgamated data, those huge data sets, you can start to peel apart and really see what people are looking for. So when, Shade was talking about creating things that are of value and that customer engagement, that aggregate data set can be really useful to figure out what people are thinking about at scale. So I think we got time for a couple more questions here. So when it comes to pitching media, what's the best way to reach out? I've tried direct email and Harrow with limited success. New in my city and trying to build my local brand as a thought leader. I'll kick that one to you, Chris.
Hire Pierpont. No.
That's the right answer.
Yeah, no, it's hard. I mean, the number of reporters and the number of news outlets in cities has been eroding for 20 years. Since the newspapers started giving away their content free 20 years ago, they haven't been able to put the toothpaste back in the tube. And so a lot of media companies have fewer and fewer reporters on staff. And so it's harder and harder to get their attention. I guess my best advice would be to follow them on social media. You can do a lot of intel, see what they're interested in. Reporters love Twitter. That's why Donald Trump has effectively been able to govern by Twitter, because every reporter is on Twitter. So he puts out a tweet and every reporter treats it like news. So go on Twitter, follow the reporters who are either in your city or in the industry or the vertical that you're trying to reach them, and just stalk them and follow them and try to engage with them. Like if they write an article, talk to them on social media and say, that was a great article. I thought that was so interesting, and build a relationship with those reporters. But it takes time. Reporters are completely underpaid and overworked. But if you can establish the relationship with them, and then kind of like we've been saying all day, don't give them something that only benefits you. Give them a good story idea that they would want to actually write about, or that their readers would want to write about. So you have to put yourself in the shoes of the reporter and the reporter's readers to make sure that you're giving them something of value. If you keep pitching them stories about how great your company is, that's not as interesting as our company is great because we're providing this service for this person, for these kinds of people in our community. And here's an example of how it helped them. So you've got to put yourself in the shoes of the reporter and their readers.
I would just one point to add on to that, the value of hiring somebody like Pierpont, I mean, clearly the relationships that they have with the media are really important, but the most valuable thing that an agency will do for you is tell you that your story is not newsworthy, because inevitably you've got stakeholders who think it is the most important thing, and they say, I do want you to pitch that story. Having somebody who understands that this is not newsworthy, and you're just going to tick off the reporter that you're emailing is probably the most valuable thing that you can get out of a partner like that. So I think understanding when to pitch something and when not to pitch something is really key.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And I think, what I would add is humans are inherently narcissistic to a certain degree, and I think people love to feel important. So to Chris's point about reaching out on Twitter and engaging with their content, same with LinkedIn. If there's any students on the call, I would actually recommend that as a piece as well. Cold reaching out to someone on LinkedIn for a coffee chat or something like that is not very successful. But if someone has been engaging, personally, if someone's been engaging with my content for 6 weeks and then reaches out, I'm a lot more likely to respond to that person because I feel like I've developed a bit of a relationship with them. So like in all marketing, I guess, kind of make sure that you're warming things up before you're actually trying to convert a lead.
Yeah, or if you're attending a webinar like this and you really think one of the speakers was terrific, reach out to them on LinkedIn afterwards and say, hey, and don't just send the link or don't send with a generic message. Say, hey, Miles, I watched your webinar on Thursday. I thought it was really awesome. I'd like to connect with you on LinkedIn. So be very specific, because I get a lot of LinkedIn requests. And if I don't know the person, or if I don't know how they know me, I decline them. But if they say, I attended your webinar or I listened to the podcast you were on, then I'm like, oh, they actually have invested a little time in getting to know me. So to Miles' point, we're all a little narcissistic, even me. And so put a little effort into getting to know the person first before reaching out.
Great. Okay, we did commit to ending 10 minutes to the hour because I want to give people time to hopefully get up and get a coffee or a glass of water before their next meeting. On behalf of all of us, thank you so much for spending this time with us. We hope you found it valuable. We'll be sending across a recording of this once it's compiled. But if you do have any other questions, by all means, reach out to us on LinkedIn, through our social media. And we hope you all have a wonderful weekend.